The bus arrived late, as always. Marlene Smith stepped off at the corner of Garden Avenue, her feet already aching inside her worn sneakers, her canvas bag slung across her body, and her heart gripped by an anguish she no longer knew how to explain. It was 6:20 in the morning, and the city of Willow Creek still yawned, sleepy. Between the grey of the mist and the timid orange of the sun, trying to rise beyond the buildings, she stopped on the sidewalk. The mansion stood before her. It wasn't the first time Marlene had looked at a gate like this, tall, made of wrought iron with golden details, flanked by towering palm trees that seemed planted there, just to remind ordinary people that they didn't belong in that world. In 22 years of work as a cleaner, she had entered many large houses. She had cleaned Italian marble, polished family silver, ironed linen clothes that cost more than 2 months of her salary. She knew how to behave. She knew where to step and where not to step. But this time was different. This time she had a reason that no employer in the world could imagine. Marlene took a deep breath, adjusted her bag on her shoulder, and pressed the intercom. The voice that answered was that of Mrs. Helen Drummond, the mistress of the house, dry and efficient, like someone who wastes no words on employees or strangers. She told her to come in. The gate opened with a discreet whir, and Marlene walked along the well-swept gravel path to the main door. Helen greeted her in the living room, a woman in her 50s with chin-length black hair, still in her workout clothes, a glass of green juice in her hand. Beautiful, with the clinical coolness of someone who takes great care of the exterior and little of the interior. She looked Marlene up and down with the same expression someone uses to examine a product's packaging before buying it. "So, you're Marlene. The agency said you have experience. 22 years, ma'am. You can call me Helen." She said this without any warmth, like someone reading a manual of good manners. The house has 18 active rooms, 6 bathrooms. The kitchen is large. I have allergies to strong-smelling products, so no perfumed bleach. The list of permitted products is in the pantry. Marlene nodded. She absorbed everything with the keen attention of someone who had spent her entire life learning to survive on foreign ground. "My husband, Dr. Robert, travels a lot. Most of the week you'll only see me and my daughter." Helen paused minimally before the word daughter, so briefly that any inattentive person wouldn't have noticed. But Marlene noticed. "Isabella is 18. She just turned 18. She's intense. Don't mind her manner." Marlene felt the firm ground beneath her feet tremble slightly, as happens before an earthquake, that only she seemed to sense. Isabella. She knew that name. She herself had written it on a letter folded into quarters 18 years ago, handed over with a 3-day-old baby to a kind-eyed nurse at a public hospital in Riverbend. If you want to give her a name, here's a suggestion. Isabella. Like the grandmother, she'll never know. She didn't know if the adoptive parents had used the name. She had prayed they wouldn't, because it would be easier to forget her if she had another name, and she had prayed they would, because it would be the only thing that would belong to her forever. Both prayers had been answered at the same time. "You can go up to see your staff room later," Helen said. "Now come, I'll show you the kitchen." Marlene's room was in the back, near the service area. Small, clean, functional, a window overlooking the wall, a single bed with a reasonable mattress, a built-in wardrobe. She placed her bag on the bed and stood still for a moment, looking at the 4 beige walls, feeling the immense weight of that moment. It had taken her 4 months to get there, 4 months since an old colleague, who had worked for another family on the same street, casually mentioned the Drummond name and the adopted daughter who lived in the mansion on Garden Avenue. Marlene heard the adoptive mother's surname, searched social media with trembling hands, and found a birthday photo. A young woman with brown hair and a wide smile, surrounded by golden balloons, and on her left shoulder, visible above her spaghetti-strap dress, a small dark crescent-shaped mark, identical to hers. She had fainted right there, in the kitchen of her 2-room apartment in Paradise Gardens, her cell phone still in her hand. "Marlene?" Helen's voice came from the hallway. "You can come down. Isabella will wake up soon and will want coffee." Marlene descended. The kitchen was spacious, with black granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. She was organizing the cleaning supplies when she heard footsteps upstairs. Then on the stairs, Then the sound of a voice speaking loudly on a cell phone. Isabella entered the kitchen as if entering a place that belonged to her, which technically was true. 18 years old, shoulder-length brown hair, rock band t-shirt, denim shorts. An expression of someone who had just woken up and hadn't yet decided if she was in a good mood. She was beautiful with that careless, annoying beauty of youth, which requires no effort to exist. She hung up her phone, tossed it onto the counter, and looked at Marlene as if looking at a new piece of furniture someone had placed in the wrong spot. "You're the new one?" It wasn't a gentle question, it was an assessment. "Yes, I am. My name is Marlene." Isabella didn't acknowledge the name. She opened the refrigerator, looked inside for long seconds with that specific expression of a rich teenager in front of a full refrigerator that seems empty, and closed the door without taking anything. "My coffee has to have foam, with almond milk, not cow's milk, and no sugar." She said this without looking at Marlene, already picking up her phone again. "The last one didn't know how to make it. I hope you do." Marlene said she did. She made the coffee, poured it into a white cup with perfect foam, just as she had learned to make in a quick course she had researched on YouTube specifically for that job. Beside the cup, she placed a slice of toasted whole wheat bread because she had seen in the pantry that it was what Helen usually bought. Isabella took the cup without thanking her, drank 2 sips, made an expression that was neither approval nor disapproval, and left the kitchen with her cell phone glued to her ear. Marlene was left alone in the kitchen. She looked at the cup her daughter had left abandoned on the counter. She felt a strange thing in her chest, somewhere between love with nowhere to go and pain she couldn't name. She'd imagined that moment in so many different ways over 18 years. She had rehearsed conversations, reunions, hugs, tears. She hadn't rehearsed for this. Standing in a black granite kitchen cleaning her daughter's coffee cup, a daughter who didn't know she was her daughter while she walked out the door without even looking back. But Marlene was there, and she was going to stay. She rinsed the cup, folded the dishcloth, and went to get the mop. At the end of the hallway, before going upstairs, Isabella paused for a second. She didn't turn her head. She just slowed her pace, as if something had lightly touched her shoulder without her knowing where it came from. Then she sped up again and disappeared upstairs. Marlene didn't see, but that hesitation lasted exactly the length of a heartbeat. And sometimes a heartbeat is the beginning of everything. The first 15 days in the Drummond mansion taught Marlene something she already knew, but needed to relearn with her whole body. Silent love is the heaviest of all burdens. She wakes at 5:30 every morning before everyone else. She descends the stairs slowly, turns on the kitchen light, puts the kettle on the stove, and watches the window overlooking the garden as the day begins to lighten outside. That is the only moment of the day that belongs to her. 15 minutes of silence before the house wakes up and demands what the house always demands. Helen is a demanding employer, but at least she is predictable. She wants things in the right places, at the right time, without unnecessary conversation. Marlene quickly understood that this woman lived in a world of schedules and appointments, and that any deviation from the routine irritated her deeply. She could live with that. Isabella was another story. The young woman had a particular way of occupying spaces that went far beyond the physical. She entered a room and changed the air of the room. She spoke loudly, laughed even louder, and treated the entire house as an extension of her own room, leaving traces wherever she went. Glasses on the edge of the sofa, clothes on the stair railing, headphones forgotten on the dining table, an absurd amount of dirty dishes for a coffee she barely finished. And there was that way she looked at Marlene. It wasn't anger exactly. It was disregard. The kind of disregard that requires no effort because the person doesn't even realize they are being disrespectful. Isabella looked at Marlene the same way she looked at the vacuum cleaner or the soap dispenser. She was a useful object in the environment, nothing more. "Did you clean my room?" she asked one afternoon, stopping in the hallway door with her arms crossed. "Yes, I did." "Did you touch my things?" Marlene turned to her calmly. "Only what was necessary for cleaning, as you asked." "I'm not Mom. I'm 18. Isabella entered the room, looked around with that investigative gaze of someone looking for something to complain about, and shrugged. "And it's not as I asked. It's your job." She closed the door. Marlene stood in the hallway for a moment. She counted to 10. Then she went to get the floor mop. There was a friend of Isabella's who frequented the house with some regularity, a slender girl with red hair named Claudia, who had a habit of talking about people in the same room as if those people couldn't hear her. It was Claudia who said one afternoon when the two were in the living room drinking smoothies, while Marlene vacuumed the rug a few feet away. "Did she stay again? I thought they were going to fire another one." "This one seems more resilient," Isabella replied without lowering her voice. "We'll see how long she lasts." Marlene showed no sign of having heard. She continued vacuuming with the same rhythm as always, but she heard every syllable. That night, lying in the staff room, she stared at the ceiling with her eyes open in the dark and thought about the hospital in Riverbend. She remembered the smell, that specific hospital smell that mixes antiseptic with the human warmth of crowded corridors. She remembered the hard bed, the white ceiling light, the heavy silence that had settled in the room after the nurse left with the baby in her arms. She was 25 years old. She had arrived alone, by bus, with a small backpack, and no one waiting outside. The child's father had disappeared when he discovered the pregnancy, in the cowardly and silent way certain men disappear. Marlene's family was from rural Oklahoma, distant and poor and unable to help. She lived in a rented room, worked in 3 different houses a week and could barely pay her own rent. The baby was born healthy, perfect, with that crescent-shaped mark on her left shoulder that the midwife said was a very charming birthmark. Marlene stayed with her for 3 days, 3 whole days. She barely slept. She kept looking at that tiny face, learning every detail by heart, like someone who knows she will need to remember it for a lifetime. The way she wrinkled her nose when she slept, her tiny fingers that looked like miniature adult fingers, the smell of milk and newness she exuded. On the 3rd day she signed the papers. She returned to her rented room by bus, alone, with empty arms and a hole in her chest that never quite closed. She had made that decision because she believed with all her tired soul that it was the purest act of love she could perform, to give her daughter what she could never offer: stability, education, a future, a life on firm ground. Now, 18 years later, she was sweeping the floor her daughter walked on, and her daughter didn't know, and her daughter treated her like furniture. Marlene closed her eyes. It wasn't anger she felt. Anger would be simpler. It was something more complex, denser, a mixture of guilt and hope and longing, and that strange thing that is wanting the best for someone who doesn't even know you exist. The following week, the juice incident happened. Isabella had invited 3 friends over to study, which was what she called the afternoons they spent on the pool deck with their books closed, talking on their phones and ordering snacks every hour. Marlene made lemonade, served it, collected glasses, served again. It was almost 9 in the evening when the friends left and Isabella came into the kitchen behind her. "Make more passion fruit juice. I'm thirsty." "I can do that, but it will take about 10 minutes because it needs to be blended and strained." 10 minutes? Isabella opened the refrigerator, took out a carton of pre-made juice, and when she turned it to open, the carton slipped from her hands and spilled everything on the floor. The orange liquid spread across the beige porcelain tile in a generous stain. Isabella looked at the stain, then looked at Marlene. "Clean that up." Marlene went to get the cloth. There was no anger in Isabella's tone, no deliberate cruelty. It was just the voice of someone who never learned to say thank you or I'm sorry, because no one ever taught her that those words were necessary. As Marlene knelt on the floor with the cloth in her hands, something flashed across Isabella's eyes for a second, so quickly that she herself probably didn't register it, something between discomfort and an awareness of something wrong. But it passed quickly, swept away by the same usual distance, and she left the kitchen without a word. Marlene scrubbed the floor. And as she scrubbed, she allowed herself to think the only thought that kept her going on days like that beneath all that arrogance and all that detachment was a girl. Just a girl who didn't yet know who she really was, and that perhaps one day, when she did know, she might understand why the woman kneeling on her floor had endured all of that with her mouth closed and her heart open. Perhaps. That was enough for now, it had to be. Outside, the Willow Creek night shimmered with the lights of the big city, indifferent and beautiful, and Marlene wiped the floor with that patience that only those who have lost everything and discovered, on the other side of loss, that they still have something precious to preserve, learn. Marlene had been working at the Drummond mansion for 2 weeks when Helen announced on a Thursday afternoon that Isabella would have a party on Saturday, a belated 18th birthday party, because on her actual birthday she had traveled to Europe with friends, and now that she was back, she wanted to celebrate at home. "Isabella will take care of the party details," Helen said, placing her reading glasses on the stack of documents that always sat on her office desk. "But the cleaning before and after, that's up to you. I'll give you a bonus in your salary for it." Marlene said that was fine. It wasn't fine. Not because the cleaning scared her, but because this would be the first time she would see Isabella at the center of a world she had built, without knowing there was a mother outside trying to peek through the crack in the window. Saturday arrived with the October sun in Willow Creek, hot and relentless. Marlene started early, polished the floors, organized the pool area, washed the glasses that would be used, prepared the skewers that the hired caterer would deliver ready but needed to be arranged on trays. Helen supervised everything with a mental checklist and that seriousness of someone who knows that throwing a perfect party is a way to affirm social standing. Isabella appeared around noon, still in her pajamas, hair tied up and cell phone in hand, and walked around the house giving orders that changed every 5 minutes. "Don't put the flowers there, put them on the other side." "This arrangement is ugly. Replace it with that one." "Marlene, the snack table needs to be closer to the pool." Marlene obeyed. She moved tables, exchanged flowers, rearranged trays, and as she obeyed, she watched her. There was something about Isabella when she wasn't being dismissive. In moments when she forgot there was someone else around, in moments when she stared at the garden with that distant look young women have when they're thinking about something they can't yet name. In those moments, Marlene could see something else beneath the tough exterior, something soft and uncertain, like the pulp of a fruit that hasn't yet ripened. It was in these moments that she had to hold herself back from saying anything. The guests arrived at 8 in the evening. Young people of 18, 20, children of families like the Drummonds, with that specific confidence of those who grew up knowing the world is organized in their favor. The music was loud from the beginning, and Helen had discreetly retired to her room around 10, leaving the party in her daughter's hands. Marlene stayed. She circulated with trays, collected glasses, emptied trash cans, wiped up spills. She was invisible in that setting, as every domestic worker learns to be. And this invisibility gave her a perspective others didn't have. She saw everything. She saw Isabella at the center of the group, laughing loudly, receiving hugs, posing for photos with that luminosity beautiful people have when they are admired. She also saw the moments when she stood aside, looking at her cell phone with an empty expression that appeared and vanished so quickly it was almost impossible to notice. Around midnight, as Marlene collected glasses near the pool, she heard Isabella talking to a group of friends. "You know what's funny? My mom hired a new cleaner, that one there." A pause. Marlene didn't turn her head, but she knew she was being pointed at. "Every time I ask for something, she looks at me with that look, you know? That poor suffering look. It irritates me so much." Laughter. Marlene placed another glass on the tray. The party lasted until almost 4 in the morning. The last guests left a trail of glasses, used napkins, crumbs, drink stains on the wooden deck, the pool full of colorful ribbons that had fallen from the balloons. Isabella entered through the back door without looking at anything and went upstairs. She didn't say a word to Marlene. Marlene was left alone in the devastated house and began to work. She swept, washed, scrubbed. She organized the kitchen, collected the trays, put away items that could be saved, threw away what needed to be discarded. The kitchen clock read 5:20 when she finished the bulk of the cleaning. She sat in a kitchen chair for exactly 2 minutes, her feet throbbing, her back with that dull ache she knew well. Then she got up and went to sleep. 2 days later, the blouse incident happened. Isabella came downstairs with a storm on her face and a white lace blouse in her hand, which she extended to Marlene with unnecessary force. "What did you do to this?" Marlene looked at the blouse. There was a small yellowish stain on the collar, the kind that appears when inappropriate bleach is used. "I washed it the right way with the products on the list." "It's stained." Isabella threw the blouse onto the counter. "This blouse cost $150. My mum will deduct it from your salary. But I didn't use anything that wasn't on the list." "I don't care." Isabella's voice was sharp as a new knife. "You washed it. It got stained. It's your responsibility." Helen was called. She came with that expression of someone who prefers not to deal with domestic conflicts, but is willing to do whatever is necessary to preserve the peace of the house. She looked at the blouse, looked at Marlene, and said with that neutral tone that was colder than any anger, "I'll have to deduct it, Marlene. Those are the rules. $150 from a salary of $200. Marlene stood still. She felt the space around her contract slightly, as happens when air is scarce. She knew, with the calm certainty of someone who pays close attention to details, that she had not used anything wrong. She knew the stain was old, the kind that appears when clothes are stored damp, not when they are washed incorrectly. But she also knew that saying so would do no good. "All right," she said, not because she agreed, but because at that moment she needed to stay. That night she lay in the small back room staring at the ceiling and doing the math in her head. $50 for the entire month. Rent, food, the blood pressure medication she had been taking since she was 40. It was almost impossible. But there was something even more impossible. Giving up now. So she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let that strange, foolish, powerful thing that mothers have, that love that persists even unseen, even unrecognized, even without receiving anything in return, keep her there, standing, in a staff room in a mansion in Willow Creek, 2 floors away from the reason for everything. Tomorrow she would wake up at 5:30. She would put the kettle on the stove. And she would stay another day. It was a Saturday in November, with that warm, late-morning light that enters through the windows and makes everything look like an old photograph. Helen and Dr. Robert had left early for a family meeting in the countryside, something involving probate and distant relatives. Isabella had slept at a friend's house and hadn't returned yet. The mansion was empty and silent, and Marlene worked alone with that silence of ownership that she never allowed herself to feel in other people's houses, but which in this one, in particular, had a different weight. She went up to Isabella's room with the cleaning cart at 10 in the morning. The room was large, with windows overlooking the garden, a light wood desk against the wall, a bookshelf full of books and equestrian trophies, the bed unmade with that profusion of cushions that a certain generation of young people considers decoration. There were clothes on the floor, an open notebook on the desk, an open jar of cream on the bedside table with the lid beside it. Marlene cleaned methodically, as always, starting with the high surfaces and moving down to the floor. It was while wiping the desk that she noticed the drawer ajar, about 3 fingers wide, showing the corner of a dark burgundy leather folder. She shouldn't have looked. But the folder had a bookmark with the word documents handwritten in a script she recognized as Helen's, and there was something about the angle of that half-open drawer that seemed less like carelessness and more like a silent invitation from the universe, if indeed the universe works that way. Marlene paused with the cloth in her hand. She looked at the folder. She looked at the bedroom door. She counted 1, 2, 3. She opened the drawer. She took out the folder with fingers that didn't tremble, because she had learned not to let her body show what her heart felt. The leather strap was fastened. There was no clasp. She opened it. The first document was a birth certificate. She recognized the format even before reading. Those forms have a specific way of existing on paper, with that official layout that seems both bureaucratic and solemn. In the biological mother's name field, she read her own name, Marlene Fatima Smith. She stood still for a moment that lasted longer than any moment should last. Then she turned the page. There were photographs, 4 of them developed on glossy paper with the date stamped on the white border, November 2006. She was in the hospital, in a pale blue gown with the baby in her arms. Her hair longer, her face younger, but her eyes the same, large, dark, with that expression she only saw in photos from that time because no mirror could capture that kind of inner gaze. And in one of the photos, taken as she had turned slightly to pick something up from the bedside table, the gown had slipped off her left shoulder, and there it was, clear as a signature, the crescent-shaped birthmark. Identical. She turned another page and found the letter. It was the letter she had written that hospital night, sitting on the edge of the bed while the baby slept in the acrylic bassinet beside her. It had taken her 2 hours to write 4 paragraphs, because each time she finished a sentence, she would stop and stare at the baby and forget what she wanted to say next. The letter had come out crooked and simple, the way things come out when the person writing is heartbroken, but her hand is steady because she has no choice. She read her own letter for the first time in 18 years. My daughter, you don't know that there's someone who gave you up for love. I know this sounds impossible, but it's the only truth I have. I have no money, no family nearby, no way to give you what you deserve. And you deserve everything. Every child deserves everything. I chose the right people to give you this life because I saw in their eyes what I felt in my heart. Take care, be happy, and know that love doesn't disappear just because 2 bodies separate. Mine will follow you invisible, wherever you go. Marlene folded the letter slowly. She put it back in the folder, put the folder back in the drawer, closed the drawer. She stood in the room for a few more moments, looking out the window with the warm November light entering through the glass, and felt a new thing: certainty. That quiet and terrifying certainty of someone who has found what they were looking for and now needs to decide what to do with it. There was also in the folder a handwritten note from Helen, dated a few months ago, which she had accidentally seen when turning the last page. It simply said, "Talk to Isabella before Christmas. She needs to know." They planned to tell her. Marlene finished cleaning Isabella's room with precise automatic movements, as if her body knew what to do while her mind processed. When she went downstairs, she made lunch for herself, ate alone in the small kitchen, washed the dishes. In the afternoon, Isabella arrived. She came in through the back door, dropped her backpack on a chair, opened the refrigerator, closed it, opened it again. "Is there anything to eat besides salad?" "There's leftover rice, beans, and roasted chicken from yesterday. Heat it up." Marlene heated it up. She placed the plate on the counter. Isabella stood eating, looking at her phone, indifferent and close at the same time, in the contradictory way only she could manage. It was then that Isabella looked up from her phone for a second, looked at Marlene with that usual evaluative expression and asked, "Do you have children?" The question came simple and direct, like a stone thrown into still water. Marlene took exactly 2 seconds to answer, 2 seconds that lasted eternities. "I had a daughter," she said. "I gave her up for adoption." Isabella's fork stopped in midair for an instant. "Why?" "Because it was what I could do for her." Isabella stared at her with an expression Marlene couldn't classify. Then she put the fork back on the plate and said in that tone she used when she wanted to sound dismissive, but sometimes just sounded like someone who had never learned another way to speak, "Real mothers don't abandon their children." She picked up her plate and went into the living room. Marlene stood still in the kitchen with the dishcloth in her hands, and those 4 words echoed in the space between the black granite countertops as if the marble returned them one by one. Real mothers don't abandon. She took a deep breath and thought that perhaps the moment to tell the truth was closer than she imagined, not because she couldn't take it anymore, but because the universe had opened a drawer that morning. And when the universe opens a drawer, it's usually because it's time to look at what's inside. The day everything changed began in the most common way possible. Marlene woke up at 5:30, put the kettle on the stove, looked out the kitchen window at the still dark garden, and drank her coffee alone before the world woke up. It had been 2 weeks since the drawer incident, 2 weeks in which she had carried the weight of that secret with almost superhuman discipline, feigning normality during the day and lying sleepless at night. The morning passed without incident. Helen had an outside appointment and left early. Dr. Robert had traveled again. Marlene cleaned the downstairs rooms, ironed clothes, organized the pantry. Around 11, Isabella came downstairs in her pajamas, grabbed a fruit from the fruit bowl, and sat on the living room sofa with her phone. It was there that Marlene heard her. She was in the hallway, going to get the cleaning product she had left in the guest bathroom, when Isabella's voice reached her through the crack of the half-open living room door. Isabella was talking on her cell phone, and she was talking loudly, with that careless volume of someone so comfortable in their own space that they forget others exist. "No, I swear it's the best. I ask for something and she rushes. The other day I spilled juice and she cleaned it on her knees without saying anything. It's amazing. A laugh. The funny thing is, she keeps looking at me with that look like, I don't know, like she's part of my family or something. It's weird and funny at the same time. Another laugh. People like that have no dignity, right? They humiliate themselves for anything. But it's okay. At least she cleans well. Marlene stopped in the hallway. There was a window to her left with a white voile curtain that filtered the November light into irregular diamonds on the floor. She looked at that light for an instant, then looked at her own hands holding the cleaning product bottle. Something moved inside her. It wasn't anger, though it could have been. It wasn't despair, though she had many reasons for it. It was something quieter and more irrevocable, like when a door that was merely ajar finally closes with the definitive click of the latch. She entered the living room. Isabella turned her face with that expression of someone who didn't expect to be interrupted. On the phone, her friend's voice was still speaking, but distant, as if coming from another world. "Hold on a second," Isabella said into the phone. She looked at Marlene. "What is it?" Marlene placed the cleaning product bottle on the coffee table with absolute calm. Then she laid the dishcloth she had on her shoulder beside the bottle. She straightened her back. She looked her daughter in the eyes. "Enough," she said. The word came out simple, without drama, without trembling, like someone stating a truth that should have been said before. Isabella slowly lowered her phone. Her expression flickered between irritation and a strangeness she couldn't yet name. "What did you say?" "I said enough." Marlene took a step into the living room. "I heard what you said, that people like me have no dignity, that it's funny to see me on my knees." She paused. "I'm not angry with you for that, but I need you to know who is on her knees on your floor." Isabella stood up, her eyes narrowed with that look she used when she wanted to intimidate. "What is this conversation? Are you threatening me?" "No." Marlene's voice was firm and low. "I'm telling you the truth." "What truth?" Marlene took a deep breath. "I am your mother." The silence that settled in the room was different from all previous silences. It was the kind that occupied all available air. Isabella's expression went through several things in quick succession: surprise, then confusion, then a defensive, dry laugh. "What? That's ridiculous. You're a cleaner. You don't even know me. You were born in a hospital in Riverbend on November 7th, 2006, at 4:22 in the morning. You weighed 7 pounds and 1 ounce, you had long arms and very slender fingers. I spent 3 days watching you without sleeping." Marlene spoke with a calm that came from a place deeper than any superficial emotion. "You have a crescent-shaped birthmark on your left shoulder." The color drained from Isabella's face. "I have that mark too," Marlene said, and pulled down her neckline slightly to show her left shoulder, where the small, dark, crescent-shaped mark was exactly where it had always been. Isabella took a step back. "You want money." Her voice still tried for the hardness from before, but there was a crack in it now, small but audible, like a branch creaking before it breaks. "You researched me. Made up this story. You want to blackmail me?" "No." Marlene didn't advance. She stayed where she was. "If you want proof, the documents are in your desk drawer, the burgundy leather folder. Your original birth certificate is there with my name. And the letter I wrote to you when you were 3 days old." Isabella stood still. Her eyes, which until then had maintained that carefully constructed expression of hardness, trembled for a second. She looked at Marlene in a different way, not as she looked at a piece of furniture, as if for the first time she was truly looking at a person. Then she turned and ran up the stairs. Marlene heard the quick footsteps in the upstairs hallway, the sound of the bedroom door closing, the key turning in the lock. She stood in the living room for a long moment. Then she went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, drank it slowly. She sat in a chair and looked at the table. There was a part of her that was terrified by what she had done. There was another part, quieter and older, that felt something close to relief. Like when you carry something heavy for too long and finally put it down, not to give up, but to be able to pick it up in a different way. Upstairs, in the locked room, there was a young woman reading a letter written 18 years ago by a woman with her hands on her heart and empty arms. And Marlene, sitting in the kitchen with the glass of water in her hand, thought that love, any true love, has this strange characteristic of surviving everything. Time, distance, the ignorance of the loved one, even the involuntary cruelty of someone who doesn't know they are hurting the very person who loves them most. Upstairs, someone was learning that. And Marlene waited. As she had waited 18 years, a few more minutes wouldn't change anything, and they could change everything. For 40 minutes, the mansion was the quietest place in the world. Marlene stayed in the kitchen. She hadn't tried to go upstairs, hadn't called her name, hadn't done anything but wait with that patience that a lifetime had trained in her as muscles are trained. In pain, in repetition, in the daily resilience of someone who has no choice but to continue. She heard Isabella cry upstairs. It wasn't a dramatic soap opera cry. It was that other kind, drier and deeper, that comes out when someone discovers that the world they knew had a false wall and that on the other side there was a corridor no one had shown them before. Then Isabella's phone rang upstairs. Marlene heard the young woman's muffled voice, too low to distinguish words, but with that specific tone of someone asking a question, knowing the answer will hurt. A long pause. Then the sound of sobs that tried and failed to hold back. Marlene closed her eyes. It must have been Helen on the other end of the line. 15 minutes later, she heard footsteps in the upstairs hallway. Slow, hesitant, different from Isabella's usual quick and decisive steps, like someone who has no doubt about their destination. These were the steps of someone descending a staircase they never realized they were climbing. Isabella appeared at the kitchen door. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair loose. She was still wearing her morning pajamas. She held the leather folder with both hands, hugged to her chest as if holding something she feared would break. Her face was stripped of all its usual armor, of all the disdain carefully constructed over the years, and what lay beneath was exactly what Marlene had always suspected. A girl. Just a girl. They stood looking at each other across the kitchen. Isabella opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "My mother confirmed," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "She said it's true. That you are." She didn't finish the sentence. Marlene stayed where she was, not because she didn't want to go to her, but because she knew, with that specific wisdom that only mothers have, that this step needed to be taken from there to here, not from here to there. "How did you know it was me?" Isabella asked, her voice cracking in the middle. "How did you find me?" "A coincidence," Marlene said softly. "Or not. I never quite know what to call these things. You came to work here on purpose. I did. You knew everything from the beginning. I did." Isabella pressed the folder against her chest harder. "And you stayed, even with everything I did to you." It wasn't a question. It was a harsh realization, which she uttered with the expression of someone seeing for the first time the magnitude of something they had done, without understanding what it was. "I stayed," Marlene said. "I was going to keep staying." "Why?" The question came out smaller than the others, almost a whisper, laden with everything a person carries when they realize they have received something they didn't deserve. Marlene allowed a moment of silence before answering, not out of hesitation, but because some answers deserve the space they need to exist fully. "Because I have loved you for 18 years. And love doesn't need conditions to exist, it just needs a reason. And you are the only reason I've ever had." Isabella let out a sound that wasn't quite a word and wasn't quite just a cry. It was both at the same time, that mixture that happens when something breaks and something opens in the same instant. She crossed the kitchen. Marlene received her with arms that had been empty for 18 years, and the hug that happened there, between the black granite countertops and the window with the oblique November light coming in, was the kind words cannot reach. It was the kind of hug that only exists when two people who have lost each other find each other on the other side of loss and discover to their astonishment and relief that love had saved their place. They stayed like that for a while. Isabella cried. Marlene didn't cry, or perhaps she cried internally the way certain people cry, without the tears knowing where to go. She just held her daughter with that calm firmness of someone who had finally arrived where she needed to be. "I said something horrible to you," Isabella murmured, her voice muffled against Marlene's shoulder. I said real mothers don't abandon their children. I know. I didn't know what I was saying. I know that too. Isabella lifted her face and looked at her with tear-filled eyes. I'm sorry. I already forgave you before you asked, Marlene said, and it was the purest truth. It was then that they heard Helen's car in the garage. The adoptive mother entered through the kitchen door and stopped at the sight of the two. She was a woman of control, Helen, someone who had built her entire life around the ability to manage situations. But what she found in that kitchen was something no management could diminish. It was the image of a daughter in the arms of another mother, and there was a mixed beauty and pain in it that demanded something more honest than control. Helen looked at Marlene for a long moment. I didn't know it was you, she said at last. When I hired through the agency, I didn't know who you were. I know, Marlene said. It's not your fault. Isabella told me. Helen shifted her gaze to her daughter and then back to Marlene. There was something on her face that needed to be said, and that she took a few seconds to find. Thank you for entrusting her to me, for doing what you did when you did, even though it was the hardest thing. Marlene said nothing. She just nodded. The three women stayed in the kitchen for a time that would be impossible to measure in minutes, talking with that mixture of tears and words and silences that true conversations have. Helen recounted what the adoption had been like, the day they received Isabella, how much they had loved her from the first moment. Marlene recounted the hospital, the decision, the 18 years of distance that she had filled with work and hope, and that love that had no address, but also did not disappear. Isabella remained quiet for most of it, listening, absorbing, with that expression of someone whose world is being reassembled with the same pieces, but in a different order. That afternoon, Marlene's staff room ceased to be the staff room. Helen said, simply and definitively, that she would stay in one of the guest rooms on the second floor. Marlene tried to refuse, and Helen said there was nothing to refuse. Isabella was the first to go upstairs with Marlene's bag in her hands. The following week, on a Monday morning, Isabella gathered the household staff in the garden. There was Mr. Gerald, who took care of the garden, Mrs. Martha, who helped on party days, and the other two who came periodically. Isabella stood before them with an expression Marlene had never seen on her, serious, without harshness, without arrogance, with only that seriousness of someone doing something that should have been done a long time ago. She apologized, publicly, clearly, without circumlocution. She apologized for the way she had treated Marlene from the first day. She said she had been cruel in ways she didn't even realize at the time, and that realizing this had cost her a shame she was learning to carry usefully instead of with paralysis. Then she turned to Helen and said that the deduction for the blouse needed to be reversed, with correction and a bonus for the time she had been unfair. Helen agreed without hesitation. The months that followed were, for Marlene, the first months of her adult life that had the texture of something she couldn't quite name, but which, if she had to try, she would call home. Not the perfect fairy tale home without imperfections. The other kind, the real one, made of small negotiations and mismatches, and moments of awkwardness and moments of discovery. Isabella was imperfect, as every person is imperfect, but she had become someone who tried, who apologized when she made mistakes, who asked with genuine curiosity about Marlene's life, about Oklahoma, about the years of work, about the stories she kept, who sometimes knocked on her room door at night just to talk, sitting on the edge of the bed with wet hair as daughters do. And there were Sunday afternoons when they sat on the porch after lunch, with the garden peaceful before them, and Isabella would say things like, "Tell me about when you were 18," or "How did you really know it was me?" And Marlene would tell. And the afternoon passed slowly with that lightness of things that arrived at the right time. On one of those afternoons, a few weeks before Christmas, Isabella arrived with a package wrapped in craft paper and satin ribbon. She placed it on Marlene's lap, with an expression that mixed pride and nervousness, which is the expression people have when they have given a lot of themselves in a gift and don't know if it will be understood. Marlene opened it slowly. It was the baby blanket. The blanket she had placed with her daughter that day, in November 2006, made of soft wool, with the little blue flower embroidery on the edge that she herself had chosen in a baby store, with the last few dollars she had in her wallet. She had thought the blanket had vanished forever, lost in time and addresses. But Isabella had found it in a box stored at the back of Helen's closet. She had taken it to a studio that specialized in restoring antique fabrics, and the blanket had been delicately washed, restored in its worn parts, and framed in a glass and light wood frame, as if it were a work of art, which, in a way, it was. Marlene stared at the blanket in the frame for a long time. Then she raised her eyes to her daughter. "How did you know this blanket existed?" "I read it in the letter." Isabella shrugged, but her eyes sparkled. "You wrote about it." Marlene held the frame with both arms and stayed like that, with that simple, heavy, good thing in her hands, and felt that sometimes, rarely, the world mends a part of what it broke. Not everything. Not back to what it was, because what was does not return, but it mends in the way it is possible to mend, with honesty, with patience, with the courage to remain standing in a Blackstone kitchen when it would be so much easier to leave. With love, always with love, with the love that doesn't disappear just because two bodies separate, the one that goes invisibly, wherever you go. The end of the story. If Marlene's journey touched your heart, know that you are not alone in that emotion. Stories like this exist because human love is stubborn, resilient, and greater than any distance. If this story made you think of someone you love, something you've lost, or something you still have time to win back, leave your comment below. Tell us the moment that touched you most. Like the video if you believe true love always finds its way back, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. There's much more to come, and each one was written with you in mind.